The Titan Core Systems Tower pierced the Manhattan skyline like a steel blade, 72 floors of glass, and ambition worth $60 billion on paper, and infinitely more in the egos of those who worked inside. On the 72nd floor, CEO Adrian Voss stood at his window surveying the city below like a king watching his kingdom. At 45, he'd built an empire on ruthless intelligence and the unshakable belief that success separated people into two categories: those who mattered and those who served. Adrian never bothered learning the names of people in the second category. Laura Amin fell squarely into that invisible population. She arrived at Titan Core every evening at 6 p.m. when the executives were leaving, and the building shifted from performance to maintenance. She cleaned their offices, emptied their trash, polished their glass walls until they sparkled for morning meetings where decisions worth millions would be made by people who never once looked her in the eye. Laura had worked here for 7 years. Single mother. Immigrant. Quiet. The kind of woman the world had trained to take up as little space as possible. But her daughter was different. Ava Amin was 12 years old and saw the world in patterns most adults couldn't recognize. While other kids her age were obsessed with social media and video games, Ava spoke technology like a second language, fluent, instinctive, natural as breathing. Every night while Laura cleaned floors 40 through 50, Ava sat in the maintenance room on the 38th floor with her grandfather's old laptop, the one that still had his files on it, his notes, his legacy. Karim Amin had been a cryptographer for the military, a genius who'd spent 40 years breaking codes that nations thought were unbreakable. He'd retired quietly, worked as a translator, and died of a heart attack 3 years ago, leaving behind a 12-year-old granddaughter who'd inherited not just his mind but his philosophy. Dignity doesn't come from your title, Habibti. He used to tell Ava, his weathered hand resting on her small shoulder. It comes from your work. From what you do when no one is watching. Ava remembered those words every time someone at Titan Core walked past her and her mother like they were furniture. Tonight, while her mother vacuumed the executive suites, Ava was doing what she did most evenings, exploring Titan Core's internal network. Not maliciously, not stealing. Just curious. She'd taught herself to slip through the company's security protocols the way other kids learned to pick locks for fun. She'd fix small bugs in the system, patch vulnerabilities she stumbled across, leave everything cleaner than she found it. It was a game, a puzzle, a way to honor her grandfather's memory by using the skills he'd taught her. But tonight, something was different. Ava's screen flickered with an anomaly she'd never seen before. A scheduled update loaded into the server system, buried 3 layers deep in code that looked official but felt wrong. The signature was legitimate: Evan Mercer, Chief Technology Officer. But the structure underneath was jagged, aggressive, designed to trigger rather than improve. Ava's fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the pathways of the code. It wasn't a virus from outside. It was something worse. A Trojan horse built from the inside. She sat back, heart hammering. Should she tell someone who would believe a 12-year-old cleaning lady's daughter? On the 68th floor, in an office that overlooked the Hudson River, Evan Mercer sat alone in the dark, staring at his screen with the cold satisfaction of someone about to commit the perfect crime. 38 years old, Stanford graduate, architect of Titan Core's most innovative systems, and completely bitterly invisible to the man whose name was on the building. For 5 years, Evan had poured his brilliance into this company. He'd designed the security infrastructure that made Titan Core impenetrable. He'd created the algorithms that generated billions in revenue. And for 5 years, Adrian Voss had taken credit for it all, patting Evan on the back at board meetings while positioning himself as the visionary, the genius, the irreplaceable leader. Last month, when the board discussed succession planning, Adrian had laughed off the suggestion that Evan might someday run the company. Evan's a talented engineer, Adrian had said, his tone dripping with condescension. But leadership requires something more. Vision, charisma, the ability to inspire. The unspoken message was clear. You'll always be useful, but you'll never be me. That night, Evan made his decision. If Adrian wanted to be irreplaceable, Evan would prove just how replaceable he actually was by building a crisis only Evan could solve, then swooping in as the hero. The board would see who the real genius was. Adrian would be exposed as a figurehead, and Evan would finally get the recognition he deserved. He'd spent 3 months building the attack, a sophisticated worm paired with a spider virus designed to work in tandem, each one protecting the other. It would cripple the company's systems at precisely 8:55 a.m. tomorrow during Adrian's keynote presentation to investors. The damage would cost millions per minute. Panic would spread. And then, after letting Adrian sweat for exactly 90 minutes, Evan would step in with the solution pre-built and waiting. It was perfect. Foolproof. No one would ever trace it back to him. Evan clicked the final confirmation. The malware would activate in 11 hours and 43 minutes. He smiled, closed his laptop, and went home to sleep like a man with nothing on his conscience. 3 floors below in the maintenance room, Ava stared at her screen, watching the countdown timer embedded in the malicious code. 11, 42, 17. 11, 42, 16. 11, 42, 15. Her hands trembled as she took a screenshot, saved the code signature, and made detailed notes about what she was seeing. She didn't know who Evan Mercer was, didn't know his title or his grudge or his plan, but she knew what was coming. And despite everything her mother had taught her about staying invisible, about not making waves, about keeping her head down in a world that didn't want to see her, Ava knew she couldn't stay silent, not when she could see the truth that everyone else was about to miss. Her grandfather's voice whispered in her memory. Dignity comes from your work, from what you do when no one is watching. Tomorrow Ava thought someone would finally be watching. Even if they didn't want to. At exactly 8:55 a.m., the 72nd floor of Titan Core Systems went dark. Not gradually. Not with warning. One moment Adrian Voss was mid-sentence in his keynote presentation to a room full of investors. The next, every screen in the building flashed red and died. The emergency lights kicked in, bathing the conference room in sickly yellow. Adrian's smile froze on his face as his assistant rushed in, phone pressed to her ear, eyes wide with barely controlled panic. Sir, we have a situation. Within minutes, the situation became a catastrophe. Titan Core's entire server infrastructure had collapsed. The primary systems were offline. Backup servers switched to emergency protocols, then immediately got swallowed by the same digital void, consuming everything else. Client data, financial records, proprietary algorithms, all of it locked behind walls of corrupted code that multiplied faster than anyone could track. The company was hemorrhaging money at a rate of $1.5 million per minute. On the 68th floor in the crisis command center that had been Adrian's executive suite 30 minutes ago, chaos reigned. 20 of the best cybersecurity experts in New York crowded around workstations, their fingers flying across keyboards, while confused voices overlapped into white noise. Evan Mercer stood among them, his face a perfect mask of professional concern. He barked orders, coordinated teams played his role flawlessly, the loyal CTO fighting desperately to save his company from an external attack. It's coming from outside, he announced to the room, pointing at fabricated IP addresses he'd planted weeks ago. Sophisticated, coordinated. This is a state-level attack, maybe Chinese or Russian. Adrian stood at the window, watching his empire crumble in real time. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched behind his back. For the first time in 20 years, he looked genuinely afraid. Fix it, he said quietly. I don't care what it costs. Fix it now. But no one could fix it. Every solution they tried made things worse. The virus adapted, evolved, slithered through their defenses like water through cracks. By 10:30 a.m., the estimated damage had climbed past $200 million. Laura Amin wasn't supposed to be in the building during daylight hours. But last night a supervisor had called. Could she come in early to help with emergency cleaning after a pipe burst on the 45th floor? Laura, who never said no to extra work, arrived at 8:00 a.m. with Ava in tow. When the systems crashed, Laura was in the maintenance closet on 72, and Ava was standing in the hallway watching through the glass walls as the crisis unfolded. Ava recognized the attack immediately. She'd spent half the night studying the code, understanding its architecture. This wasn't chaos, it was choreography. The worm and spider worked together, each protecting the other. Elegant, vicious. Designed by someone who understood Titan Core's systems intimately. She watched the experts frantically typing, watched them trigger the very traps she'd identified in her notes. They were fighting blind, treating symptoms instead of the disease. A young programmer named Marcus stood near the conference room door, frantically reviewing code on his tablet. Ava approached quietly. Excuse me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus didn't look up. Kid, you can't be here. This is a crisis situation. I know. That's why I'm here. Ava pointed at his screen. If you reverse the encryption on layer 4 of the system architecture, you'll find the creator's signature embedded in the code. Marcus finally looked at her. Really looked, his expression somewhere between confusion and irritation. What are you talking about? The attack isn't external, it's internal. Someone who knows the system built this. And they use their name as the encryption key because they're arrogant. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but a voice cut through the room like a knife. What is this? Adrian Voss had turned from the window. His eyes locked on Ava, this small girl in worn sneakers and a faded jacket, standing in the middle of his crisis like she had any right to be there. Who let a child into this room? Adrian's voice was ice. Brenda Hale's office on the 40th floor was smaller than the crisis room, but infinitely quieter. She cleared her desk with one sweep of her arm, set up her personal workstation, and stepped back. You have access to everything I have access to, Brenda said, logging in with her credentials. Which is more than most people in this building. Ava sat down, her feet barely touching the floor. Laura stood behind her, hands clasped tight, looking like she might physically pull her daughter away at any second. Sweetheart, are you sure about this? Laura whispered. Ava looked up at her mother, and for a moment, she was just a 12-year-old girl who wanted her mom to believe in her. Grandpa taught me, Mama. I can do this. Laura's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded and stepped back. Ava's fingers touched the keyboard, and everything else disappeared. The code unfolded across her screen like a language she'd been speaking since birth. She could see it now, the full architecture of the attack. It was even more sophisticated than she'd thought. 2 viruses working in tandem. The Spider, a data deletion program disguised as a temperature monitoring tool hidden so deep in the system that the experts upstairs had been treating it like legitimate software. It was systematically erasing backup files, making recovery impossible. The Worm, a lockdown protocol that encrypted data in 10-minute cycles, each layer requiring a different key. Even if you broke through one layer, the next would seal before you could access it. And beneath both of them, the real genius, a logic bomb. If anyone tried to remove the Worm incorrectly, the entire system would trigger a catastrophic self-destruct, wiping everything clean. It was beautiful in the way a perfectly engineered trap was beautiful. Ava sat back thinking. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. Every code has a weakness, Habibti. Find the creator's pride. She dove back in, tracing the Worm's encryption patterns. The keys changed every cycle, but the structure didn't. And structure always told a story. 15 minutes later, she found it. Brenda, Ava said quietly. The person who built this used his own name as the master encryption key. Brenda leaned over her shoulder. How do you know? Because he's arrogant. He built something so complex he thought no one would ever get far enough to find the signature. But it's there. Ava pointed at a string of code. See this pattern? It's a Visionaire cipher. Old school. Military grade. The kind my grandfather used to teach me with. Can you break it? I already did. Ava's fingers flew across the keyboard. The key is a 4-letter name. EVAN. Brenda's face went pale. Evan as in... Your CTO, yes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Brenda grabbed her phone and called the crisis room upstairs. Robert, she said when the lead security consultant answered. Check Evan Mercer's access logs from the past 72 hours. Everything. I'll explain later. While Brenda made calls, Ava built her counterattack. She couldn't just remove the viruses the logic bomb would trigger. She had to trick them first. Ava created a ghost server, a perfect digital replica of Titan Core's main system. Then she wrote a redirect protocol that would funnel the spider virus away from real data and into the ghost environment. Let it eat fake files while the real system recovered. For the Worm, she used the encryption key Evan to unlock the first 3 layers, but the deeper layers needed something more. She wrote a script that mimicked the Worm's own language, essentially convincing it that she was authorized to be there. It was like picking a lock by making the lock think you were the person who'd installed it. Her grandfather had taught her this. The best way to defeat a trap is to make it believe you belong there. 38 minutes after sitting down, Ava hit enter. The ghost server sprang to life. The spider virus took the bait, redirecting into the fake environment, where it began happily deleting worthless data. The worm's encryption layers peeled back one by one, like petals falling from a flower. On the 72nd floor, screens began flickering back to life. Systems rebooted, data streams restored, the hemorrhaging stopped. Robert Chen, the lead cybersecurity expert, stared at his monitor in disbelief. What the who just did that? Upstairs in the crisis room, Evan Mercer felt ice flood his veins. He watched his carefully constructed attack dismantling itself, watched his signature being exposed, watched 5 years of planning dissolve in front of 30 witnesses. He didn't think. He just ran. Evan took the stairs, racing down to the 38th floor where the physical servers were housed. If he could pull the hard drives, manually destroy the evidence, maybe he could still claim innocence. Blame it on an external hack that coincidentally used his name. He burst through the server room door and stopped. George Patterson stood in front of the server racks, arms crossed. George was 62, had worked building security for Titan Corps since the tower opened, and had spent the last 7 years watching Ava Amin grow up in the maintenance room down the hall. "George, move!" Evan panted. "I need to access the servers." "No one's touching these servers," George said quietly. "Especially not you. I'm the CTO. That's an order. And I'm the man who's been watching that little girl solve computer problems in her spare time for 3 years. I'm the man who brought her hot chocolate when she worked past midnight." George's expression hardened. "So no, Mr. Mercer. You're not getting past me." Evan lunged forward. George, who'd boxed in the Navy 40 years ago, caught him with a right hook that sent the CTO sprawling. Security arrived 2 minutes later, alerted by Brenda. They found Evan Mercer on the floor, nose bleeding, with George Patterson standing over him like a guardian angel in a security uniform. On the 40th floor, Ava sat back from the computer as the final system came online. Total elapsed time 42 minutes. Total damage prevented estimated $800 million. Laura pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. Brenda stared at the screen, then at Ava, then back at the screen. "How did you—" "My grandfather," Ava said simply. "He always said the smartest people leave signatures in their work. They can't help it. Evan built something brilliant, but he was too proud to make it truly invisible." Brenda knelt beside Ava's chair. "You just saved this company." "I know," Ava said quietly. Then she looked at her mother. "And Mr. Voss promised me $100 million. Somewhere in the building, Adrian Voss was about to learn that mockery was the most expensive mistake he'd ever made. By the time Adrian Voss made it down to the 40th floor, the entire building knew what had happened. Word spread through Titan Corps like wildfire. A 12-year-old girl had done what 30 experts couldn't. The cleaning woman's daughter had saved the company. Adrian walked into Brenda's office expecting to find chaos, expecting to manage damage control, expecting anything except what he saw: Ava Amin sitting calmly at a computer, her mother's hand on her shoulder, while systems restoration reports scrolled across multiple screens, showing green checkmarks where red alerts had been. Robert Chen stood behind them, shaking his head in disbelief. "Mr. Voss, you need to see this. She didn't just stop the attack. She reverse-engineered it, traced it back to the source, and built a containment protocol that preserved all our data. This is—" He struggled for words. "This is graduate-level work, PhD level. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I wouldn't have thought of half these solutions." Adrian stared at Ava. The mockery from 2 hours ago sat like ash in his mouth. "The CTO," Brenda said quietly. "Evan Mercer. He built the attack. Security has him in custody on 38. Adrian's face went white. "Evan." "She found his signature in the code." Brenda gestured to the screen. "He used his own name as the encryption key. Ava cracked it in 15 minutes. The room fell silent. Adrian looked at this small girl in her worn clothes, at her mother still in her cleaning uniform, and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: shame. He cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." Ava turned in her chair, met his eyes. "You owe my mother one too." Adrian blinked. No one spoke to him like that. No one. But something in this child's steady gaze reminded him of someone, and the memory nagged at him like a splinter he couldn't locate. "You're right," he said finally. "Laura, I apologize. To both of you. What I said upstairs was cruel." Ava finished. "You were cruel because you thought we didn't matter." The words landed like stones. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it again. Robert Chen stepped forward. "Sir, we need to understand how she learned this." "Ms. Amin Ava, you mentioned your grandfather taught you." "Karim Amin," Ava said, and something in Adrian's chest went tight at the name. "He worked in military cryptography for 40 years. He taught me code the way other kids learn music." "Karim Amin," Adrian repeated slowly. The name pulled at memory's decades-old threads he'd buried under success and ambition. Laura watched him, saw recognition flickering across his face. "You knew him," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Adrian moved to the window, staring at the city he'd conquered, and suddenly he was 25 again. Broke. Desperate. Standing in a small apartment in Queens with a business plan no bank would touch, and a dream everyone called impossible. 1985. Adrian said, his voice distant. "I had nothing. Just an idea and student loans I couldn't pay. Every investor laughed me out of their office." He turned back. "There was a man, a translator, who worked at the community center where I went to use their computers. He heard me talking about my plans. He didn't laugh." Laura's hand tightened on Ava's shoulder. "He gave me $15,000, Adrian continued. "His entire savings. Said he believed in the idea, believed in me. Told me to pay it back when I could, no interest, no contract. Just a handshake and faith." Adrian's jaw clenched. "I built Titan Core with that money. The seed funding that became everything." "My father," Laura whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He never told us he helped you. He just said he'd made a good investment once years ago." Adrian's eyes closed. "When I made my first million, I looked for him. Wanted to pay him back 100-fold. But I couldn't find him. He'd moved and He stopped, the lie catching in his throat. The truth was uglier. He'd looked for a week, maybe 2, then got distracted by the next deal, the next opportunity. Told himself he'd find Karim Amin eventually when things slowed down. But things never slowed down. And eventually Adrian had simply forgotten. Buried the debt under mansions and yachts and the convenient amnesia of the very successful. "He died 3 years ago," Laura said softly. "Heart attack. He worked as a translator until the day he died because he was proud of his work. He lived in a small apartment, took the bus everywhere, never asked for anything from anyone." Adrian felt something crack inside his chest. The man who'd believed in him when no one else would, who'd given everything with no expectation of return, had died without ever seeing that faith repaid. "He used to tell Ava stories," Laura continued, wiping her eyes, "about codes and patterns, and how dignity doesn't come from titles. He taught her everything, not because he wanted her to be rich or famous, but because he wanted her to see the beauty in problems that others call impossible." Ava pulled something from her pocket, a worn photograph, edges soft with handling. She held it up. An old man with kind eyes and weathered hands holding a much younger Ava on his lap, both of them bent over a laptop. "This is him," Ava said. "This is the man you forgot." Adrian took the photo with shaking hands. 40 years compressed into a single image. He remembered those eyes now, that patient smile, the gentle voice that had said, "I see something in you, young man. Don't let the world make you forget who you are." But Adrian had forgotten. Forgotten Karim. Forgotten humility. Forgotten that people like Laura and Ava existed, that they mattered, that their dignity was no less than his own simply because they cleaned floors while he owned buildings. He'd become exactly what Karim had warned him against, a man who measured worth in dollar signs, and forgot that the people invisible to him were human beings, with their own brilliance, their own value, their own stories that could change the world. "He saved your company twice," Ava said quietly. "Once 40 years ago with his money, and today with what he taught me." Adrian handed back the photograph, his hands trembling. "What do I owe you?" he asked. "Not in dollars. What do I actually owe you?" Ava looked at her mother, then back at Adrian. "You promised me $100 million, Mr. Voss. I'm going to hold you to that promise. But not the way you think. Adrian called an emergency meeting in the main conference room 2 hours later. The board of directors, senior executives, legal team, and a handful of witnesses filled the space. News crews waited outside. Word of the crisis and its unusual resolution had already leaked. Ava sat at the massive table, her feet dangling above the floor, her mother beside her looking terrified. Brenda stood behind them like a guardian. Adrian stood at the head of the table, a leather portfolio in front of him. This morning, in front of 30 witnesses, I made a promise. I told this young woman that if she could save Titan Core when our best experts couldn't, I would pay her $100 million. Murmurs rippled through the room. The CFO looked like he might have a stroke. She did exactly that, Adrian continued. In 42 minutes, Ava Amin stopped an attack that would have cost us over $1 billion in losses and destroyed our reputation permanently. She exposed internal sabotage, preserved our data infrastructure, and quite literally saved this company. He opened the portfolio and slid a check across the table. $100 million made out to Ava Amin. The room went silent. Ava looked at the check for a long moment. Then she pushed it back across the table. I don't want it, she said quietly. Adrian's eyebrows rose. Excuse me. I don't want the money. Not for myself. Ava folded her hands on the table exactly the way her grandfather had taught her when negotiating. But you made a promise, Mr. Voss, and I'm going to hold you to it. Just differently. I'm listening. Ava took a breath. I have 3 requests. 3 things that are worth more to me than money in a bank account. Adrian sat down, leaning forward. Name them. First, Ava said, her voice steady. I want a full scholarship. MIT or Stanford, whichever accepts me. All expenses. Tuition, housing, books, everything. And after undergraduate, I want funding for graduate school if I choose it. Plus, access to a private research lab here at Titan Core, where I can work on projects during summers and breaks. Robert Chen, still in the room, nodded approvingly. She's earned it 10 times over. Done, Adrian said without hesitation. What's the second request? Ava turned to look at her mother. Laura was crying silently, one hand pressed to her mouth. My mother has worked in this building for 7 years, Ava said. She's cleaned your offices, emptied your trash, made sure everything was perfect before you arrived each morning. And in 7 years, most of you have never learned her name. The room shifted uncomfortably. I want my mother promoted to Director of Building Operations and Logistics. Real title, real office, real respect. Salary of $200,000 per year with full benefits and a 10-year contract. The CFO sputtered. That's fair. Adrian interrupted, his eyes never leaving Ava's face. That's fair. Laura Amin, as of today, you are Director of Building Operations. We'll have HR draw up the contract by end of business. Laura couldn't speak. She just reached for Ava's hand and held on like her daughter was the only solid thing in a spinning world. And the third request? Adrian asked. This was the one Ava had thought about most carefully, the one that mattered more than her education, more than her mother's security, the one her grandfather would have insisted on. The remaining money, all of it, goes into a foundation, the Karim Amin Foundation. Ava's voice strengthened. It will provide college scholarships and vocational training for the children of every low-wage worker in this building and any company Titan Core partners with. The cleaning staff, security guards, kitchen workers, drivers, mailroom, everyone you walk past every day without seeing. She leaned forward and suddenly this 12-year-old girl looked like she could stare down empires. Because my grandfather taught me something you forgot, Mr. Voss. He said dignity doesn't come from your title. It comes from your work. From what you do when no one is watching. Every person in this building has dignity. Every child of every worker here deserves the same chances I'm getting. Not because of charity, because of justice. The silence in the room was absolute. Adrian stared at this child who'd just redistributed a fortune before she'd even touched it. Who'd saved his company and then used her reward to lift up everyone he'd spent decades stepping over. He thought of Karim Amin standing in that apartment in Queens, handing over his life savings to a stranger with a dream. No contract, no guarantee, just faith in human potential. My grandfather believed in people, Ava continued quietly. He believed in you when you had nothing. and you became successful. You became powerful. But somewhere along the way, you stopped believing in people like him. Like us. You forgot that the woman who cleans your office might have a daughter who could save your empire. You forgot that people without titles might have more dignity than people with corner offices. Adrian's throat tightened. Every word landed like truth he'd spent 40 years running from. You asked what you owe me, Ava said. You owe my grandfather the man you promised you'd become, the one who remembered where he came from, the one who understood that everyone matters. Adrian stood slowly, walked to where Laura and Ava sat, and did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He extended his hand to Laura first. I'm sorry, he said, for every time I walked past you like you were invisible, for every time I forgot that you make this building run. I'm sorry. Laura took his hand, tears streaming down her face. Then Adrian knelt beside Ava's chair, putting himself at her level. I accept all 3 requests, the scholarship, your mother's position, the foundation. He paused. And I promise your grandfather I'll remember this. I'll remember who I was supposed to become. Ava studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. Adrian stood, turned to his legal team. Draw up everything she requested. I want contracts signed by tomorrow. He looked around the room at the executives who'd spent decades climbing over others to reach the top. And I want every senior leader in this company to spend 1 week per year working alongside our operations staff. Cleaning, security, kitchen, all of it. We're going to remember who builds the foundation we stand on. The CFO opened his mouth to object. That wasn't a suggestion, Adrian said quietly. He turned back to Ava. Anything else? Ava smiled, the first real smile since this whole nightmare began. Just one thing. My mom gets weekends off, starting now. Done. 3 months later, Laura Amin walked through the front doors of Titan Corp in a tailored navy suit, her employee badge reading, Director of Building Operations in bold letters. Employees who'd never noticed her before now stopped to greet her. The receptionist smiled and said, Good morning, Ms. Amin. Laura still wasn't used to it, probably never would be. But she wore the title with the same quiet dignity she'd carried while pushing a cleaning cart. On the 55th floor, Ava sat in her private lab, a glass-walled space filled with cutting-edge equipment Adrian had insisted on. She was working on a new security protocol, something that would make what Evan had attempted impossible. MIT had already accepted her for early enrollment at 16. Stanford had countered with their own offer. Ava hadn't decided yet. She had time. On her desk sat a framed photograph, her grandfather smiling, his weathered hands resting on young Ava's shoulders. Adrian visited her lab once a week, not to supervise, not to check on his investment, but to learn. He'd sit across from her, ask questions about code and systems and the patterns she saw, and listen like a student grateful for a teacher. Today he brought something with him, a bronze plaque. This goes in the main lobby tomorrow, he said, showing it to her. It read, The Kareem Amin Foundation, established 2024. Dignity comes not from titles, but from the work we do and the people we lift up. Below that, the names of the first 50 scholarship recipients. Children of security guards, janitors, kitchen staff, maintenance workers. Kids who'd been invisible their whole lives, now heading to college with full funding. He'd like this, Ava said quietly, touching her grandfather's name. I hope so. Adrian set the plaque down carefully. I've been thinking about something you said, about forgetting who I was supposed to become. Ava waited. I called my first investor meeting at a community center in Queens. The same one where your grandfather worked. Adrian's voice was rough. I'm starting a new initiative. Titan Corp will recruit talent from places we've never looked before. Community colleges, vocational schools, people without fancy degrees who have the skills and the hunger. Like my grandfather believed in you. Exactly like that. Adrian met her eyes. I can't repay what I owe him. But maybe I can pass it forward. Make sure his faith in people doesn't die with him. The door opened. Laura walked in carrying a bag from Ava's favorite sandwich shop. Lunch break, sweetheart. You've been coding for 6 hours. Ava saved her work, and the 3 of them sat together, CEO, director, and the girl who'd changed everything eating sandwiches and talking about ideas like equals. Downstairs, George Patterson made his rounds nodding to the new security hires. Two of them were scholarship recipients' parents given positions after Adrian restructured hiring practices. George still brought Ava hot chocolate sometimes. Some things didn't need to change. In a federal prison 200 miles away, Evan Mercer sat in a cell serving 15 years for corporate sabotage and fraud. He'd been brilliant enough to build the perfect attack, but too arrogant to make it unbreakable. Pride, as Ava's grandfather used to say, left signatures. That evening, as the sun set over Manhattan, Ava stood at her lab window beside her mother watching the city light up. "You know what Grandpa would say if he saw all this?" Ava asked. Laura smiled through tears. "He'd say you did good work, Habibti. He'd say we all did." Ava leaned against her mother. "You worked for 7 years in a building where people looked through you. You kept your dignity. You raised me to speak truth. That's the work that mattered." Below them, the Titan Core lobby glowed with evening light. Tomorrow workers would arrive to see the bronze plaque honoring a man most of them never knew. A translator. A cryptographer. A father and grandfather who believed dignity lived in everyone regardless of title or wealth. His legacy wasn't the money he'd given away, or the codes he'd broken. It was a 12-year-old girl who'd looked at a billionaire and reminded him what it meant to be human. Adrian had mocked the maid's daughter and promised her a fortune as a joke. And she'd taken that fortune and built something he never could have imagined, a foundation not of money, but of justice. Not of charity, but of recognition that every person who walked through those doors mattered. The powerful had been humbled. The invisible had been seen. And in a building where class had once been everything, dignity finally belonged to everyone.